Happy Monday. How's it going, everybody?
It's going well. Good to
Yeah.
see you, Justin.
Hey, what's up,
Yeah,
Justin?
likewise. Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. On the Money Winner Data Chat today, we have Justin Borgman. For people who do not know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. I'm Justin Borgman, co-founder and CEO of Starburst. Starburst is the company behind an open source project called Trino, and we offer a query engine that allows you to query your data anywhere.
That's really cool. Walk us through the origin stories of Starburst. I think you have a pretty interesting backstory.
Yeah. So Starburst actually was founded as a bootstrap company. We didn't actually raise any venture at first back in 2017. And that's because the open source project itself actually predated the company by a few years. So, Trino was originally known as Presto. Presto was created at Facebook back in 2012 and then open source in 2013 by my co-founders, Martine, Dane, and David. And I met them when I was actually at Teradata. Teradata had bought my first company, which was called Hadapt. It was an early SQL engine for Hadoop. And basically, while I was at Teradata, I was thinking about kind of the future of data warehousing analytics and met the creators of Presto while they were at Facebook. And ultimately, that began a collaboration. And we started contributing to the Presto project. And I think what was so striking to me was that Presto was not just a SQL engine for Hadoop. There were many SQL engines for Hadoop already at that point in time, but really it was a SQL engine for anything. And the way I like to explain it to people, it's like a database without storage. And that was a really cool concept, particularly because my time at Teradata sort of showed me that despite Teradata being the pioneer of the enterprise data warehouse model, not one of their customers really had all of their data inside of an enterprise data warehouse. And so everybody had these data silos. Everybody had data that lived outside of that model. And so we felt like there were a lot of, inefficiencies, especially as you're trying to combine new data with old data, and maybe even transition from on-prem to the cloud. And so all of that kind of motivated an interest in ultimately building a company behind this. And so in 2017, we did exactly that. And because the project was already going, we were able to sell support to existing users of the project initially. And that allowed us to kind of get off the ground without raising capital. Now, a couple years into it, we decided to change gears, and now we've raised over 414 million just in the last two and a half years. So very different today than the early days, but the early days were very fun. Great way to get a company off the ground if you can do it.
Yeah, there's so many heavy hitter companies in the data space right now, and I suppose you can't compete on growth without raising some money, right? Kind of in that position.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, we wanted to build a big standalone business, and we felt like that was going to allow us to grow fast enough to do exactly that.
That's interesting. Walk me through the mindset, though, right? So because a bootstrap mindset, it seems a lot different than raising $415 million mindset. So what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big transition. You're absolutely right. I mean, in the early days when you're bootstrapped, I think what people don't realize is you're profitable because you have to be. Like, cash flow positivity is life essentially when you're bootstrapped. And so that meant we had to be very frugal. We had to be very thoughtful about the investments that we made. And that's the way we would talk about it, is like, do we want to invest in this idea or this headcount or that headcount? Because you don't just have a pile of money to deploy. Everything that you're doing is just taking from your revenue stream and ultimately investing that in the business. So it created a certain discipline, I would say, and a certain way of thinking that I think was actually helpful even as we made the transition, because we still think about the investments that we make. The difference being that we are willing to now invest ahead of where we are and accelerate our growth. So the biggest things that have changed, I would say, today versus in those early years is just the size of the go-to-market, the size of the field organization. Salespeople obviously take some time to become productive, so you have to make those investments up front, knowing that you're going to burn cash before you see the results of that. And so that's something that we're able to do now, really invest in new regions, new segments of the market, and allow us to ultimately grow even faster.
It seems like that discipline has to be a big positive, especially now that we seem to be coming out of this era of like really easy money and just profligate, startup spending and decadence. So.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I like to tell our team that I think we were like built for this period of economic history in a way. Like we were always the contrarians in the early days, the ones that were very much like pinching pennies and trying to be mindful of how we spent our money. And now that's becoming in vogue out of necessity. I think the fundraising environment has changed dramatically in the last 6 months. And, we'll see how the economic situation plays out, but we feel like we're really well set up, for whatever is yet to come.
Yeah, it seems to be kind of in your DNA, so to speak. So
yeah,
that's pretty cool. I mean, even taking a step back further, I mean, kind of walk me into your personal journey into the data field. I think that sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I kind of ended up here somewhat accidentally, I would say. So I started my career as a software engineer, like I'm sure many of your viewers today, came from a computer science background. I was a software engineer for about 6 years. And then I went to business school. And I went to business school really with the idea of learning more about business. I was very interested in it. I thought maybe I would start a company at some point, wasn't sure what it would be. And it was actually while I was in business school that I read a research paper in the computer science department by a young professor named Daniel Abadi. And Daniel Abadi, for those of you who don't know, a very brilliant computer scientist. At that point, that was like the beginning of his career. His prior research as a PhD student at MIT was under Mike Stonebreaker, and ultimately became a database company called Vertica. So, really good pedigree in his early years. Now he was a brand new professor, and one of the first papers he wrote was called Hadoop DB. And this is in 2009, mind you, when Hadoop was like pretty much under the radar, but just starting to gain momentum outside of the internet companies. And the basic idea of the paper was to think about Hadoop as a data warehouse. And that was a pretty novel concept, to think about how you would do, fast SQL analytics in Hadoop. And as a reminder, like Hadoop was the data lake before people started calling things the data lake. So Hadoop was the first data lake. Now more and more, people do, data lakes and object storage in the cloud, but Hadoop was really the first concept. So this was sort of like the first thinking around, a lake house, as people will call it today. And I read that paper in my first semester, actually, of business school. And I was just like, wow, this is really cool. Imagine, what you could do to sort of disrupt the way data warehousing analytics are done if you could do this in an open source, platform like Hadoop. And so I walked over to the computer science department, met Daniel Abadi and his PhD student, Camille Baida-Pawlikowski, and encouraged them to start a company around that. So that became my first startup, which was called Hadapt. And we really commercialized Daniel and Camille's research, raised venture, built that business over 4 years, and then ultimately were acquired by Teradata. But that's kind of how I ended up here.
It's interesting because, even by 2015, there was this whole culture around Hadoop that had this attitude like history has ended. No one's going to write SQL anymore. In fact, you're just going to write your own MapReduce jobs in Java. Don't worry about schema. Just dump your data in the data lake. And then all of a sudden, like Hive had come out, it was already popular. And within a few years, people really started to recognize that the data lake was a lot of things that data warehousing was also about, like schema and data modeling and data management.
Totally.
It's interesting. Speaking of data lakes, Starburst has recently, I wouldn't say recently, but you started to associate yourself more and more with the data lake. Can you walk the audience through what that means for data lakes and Starburst?
Yeah, so from the earliest days of the creation of Presto and then Trino, data lakes have always been a really important use case, particularly by the hyperscale internet companies. So Facebook, Airbnb, Netflix, LinkedIn, Twitter, Lyft. We're always using this on ridiculous scale. I mean, petabyte scale. Thousands of concurrent queries around primarily a data lake. When we started Starburst, part of what we found very interesting about the technology and its application is the fact that it can do data lakes, but it can also extend beyond data lakes and access other data sources as well. And that particular value proposition plays very well within the enterprise segment. Large Fortune 1000 types of customers who have data silos everywhere, and being able to query that data wherever it lives is valuable. Having said that, we do believe and really have always believed that you are going to have a large center of gravity, probably the largest center of gravity in a data lake because of the economics. It's going to be the cheapest place to store data, and you can use open data formats like ORC or Parquet or some of these newer ones like Delta and Iceberg. And that allows you to essentially interoperate with other tools. So you could train a machine learning model using Spark and then query it via SQL, using Starburst. And so, naturally, we think that's an important place to store a lot of data. But again, I think what makes us fundamentally different is that we can also query outside of that. So we really want to be your single point of access. That's kind of what we're striving to be within a customer, to access data outside and within that data lake.
That's interesting. It sort of flips the notion of a data warehouse on its head. I think the way people see how data should be stored, I think the common notion really is it's just store it, centralize it, query it, and so forth. But is it fair to say that what you guys are doing is basically inverting that whole model in a sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, we say that we like to turn the model inside out, which I think is exactly what you said, that rather than having all roads lead to a central database, you can have the optionality. That's another thing we talk about, really the freedom to decide where that data lives. And we're not against data movement, to be clear. I think there's certainly great reasons to move data and move it into a data lake, for example, or even into a data warehouse in certain cases. But the key here is we don't force you to do that. That's not a required prerequisite step. Ultimately, the business value you're trying to drive is answers to your questions, and you can get answers to your questions whether you do or don't move data. And that's really, the paradigm shift, if you will. And sometimes when we're talking to somebody for the first time that hasn't heard of this, it is like a mind-blowing sort of concept to sort of turn that around and flip the script. But we think ultimately it's better for customers to have that freedom. We think that data lock-in is probably the worst kind of vendor lock-in out there. And so using a query engine like ours gives you the freedom and flexibility to decide where that data lives.
And is there a use case for Starburst to move data? Can I think of Starburst as a tool that will also allow me to move data into my data lake and transform it? Or is that not a good use case for Trino?
It is a good use case. In fact, many of our customers do that too. And that's what's interesting about the tool. It is so flexible that we're even being taught new use cases for it, from time to time. So, I mean, we even have customers that are taking data out of Teradata on-prem and then loading it into BigQuery in the cloud, which is not a use case that would have come to mind necessarily, but it works and you can do that. So a lot of flexibility in that. I would say probably more common is taking it out of a classical data warehouse, doing a transformation and landing it in a data lake. But all of these things are possible. Basically, if we can connect to it, then you can do it. As long as you can express it in SQL, you can do it. And by the way, I know you've chatted with the folks at DBT. DBT is a great combination with Starburst and Trino because we can be the engine of that transformation, right? You define the transformation with DBT, and then we can go execute it, either in the data lake or wherever the data may live.
That's really cool. It seems like DBT is sort of the center of the universe right now, or the Franco, so to speak. Yeah, it's interesting. What are some common data lakes these days that you guys are seeing?
Certainly all of the different clouds, whether it's S3 or Azure Data Lake Storage or Google Cloud Storage, even on-prem, we still see some Hadoop. We see object storage on-prem like MinIO or even from IBM. They have their cloud object storage product. Red Hat has a product called Ceph. So we see all kinds of varieties. Actually, even other storage like EMC's, ECS is now S3 compatible. So long as it's S3 compatible, that's a great option for you to store your data in a data lake.
That's cool. Actually, Kate has a question here. Kate's Fashion asks, she'd love to hear about the recent Verada acquisition. What's the goal with this purchase?
Yeah, so this is a big deal for us anyways. It was our first ever, acquisition. And hope, I'm sure not the last. But what we were trying to do with Virata in particular is really accelerate one dimension of our roadmap. Virata speeds up performance. And in particular, what they offer is basically smart caching, smart indexing technology. So you don't have to necessarily decide what data to cache yourself. So it's kind of removing that burden from the data engineer and instead doing that automatically and just effectively speeding up those queries that are going to be accessing data over and over and over again. So for us and for our customers, it was an obvious performance win. I think on average, we're seeing something like a 7x performance improvement for those types of workloads. And, add to that, what made it so perfect for us was we already knew these people very well. They were already involved in the open source community. And so, we knew them, we knew their talents, we knew how skilled they were. And effectively, the product they had built was basically built for our technology. And so it seemed like a no-brainer. So super excited to be able to get that done. And we're rapidly getting that into the market here in the next couple months.
That's cool. I had a chance to demo their product. Actually, Ori from was on my show a few months ago. But yeah, in the back of my head too, I was like, I bet they get bought by Starburst. Totally, I think this is going to happen. So it just seemed too perfect, right? Like, yeah. And it was a great compliment. So I think it's a very good decision. So shout out to the Virata team too. Congratulations. So great technology, great people too, I should say. So
absolutely,
yeah. That's awesome. What are some of the other technologies you're excited about in the Trino Starburst ecosystem right now?
Let's see. I mean, I think for us, given that we're trying to be this single point of access, there are a lot of areas of complementarity that we think are interesting opportunities for us to partner. We partner very closely with some of the access control providers like Privacera and Immuta. In the market, we'll see, large financial services companies that maybe have already, decided that, they need attribute-based access control, and Immuta does that very well. And so that's a very logical complement where we'll work together and have done that many times. Another area would be around catalogs, so Elation and Calibra are natural partners there. And then, of course, the BI and visualization layer is just an obvious area of complement. It was actually one of the reasons that Salesforce ultimately decided to participate in our last fundraising round was really just the Tableau relationship. And so, I get the opportunity to meet with Francois once a month. Francois is the chief product officer of Tableau. And that's a great partnership along with any of the BI tool vendors. We work very closely with Power BI and Looker and all of those. I like to say that, a database technology doesn't really demo well without a BI tool. So those are all very, very, valuable partnerships for us.
That's really cool. You guys work with embedded analytics use cases very much?
We do. Actually, that's an increasingly common use case for us, even in our Galaxy platform. Galaxy is our SaaS solution, and we have a number of companies that are basically building their applications on top of Galaxy, where Galaxy is sort of powering the analytics for their solution ultimately. So yes, embedded is definitely a strong play for us.
Actually, I got a question here from LinkedIn. Raghavan asks, congrats on the Virata acquisition. How do you stack rank yourself against the competition? Which company do you think is your closest competitor?
Closest competitor. I mean, the closest competitor is variations of ourselves. And what I mean by that is I think any open source company has to compete to some degree with the open source project that underlies it, right? So we have a lot of folks that use either open source Trino or open source Presto, or they use those offerings on AWS, like EMR makes both of those available. And then there's also Athena on AWS, which is actually our open source under the covers. So those are probably, like, by volume our biggest competitors. And I think for any open source company, what's great about that is you'd rather have them using flavors of yourself than something else. I like to say that those are, maybe not our customers yet, but they could be someday. And I think it's a great challenge for ourselves to continue to add enough value to sort of drive somebody to want to use the Starburst version of that. Like, for example, Maybe you really love Trino, but you don't want to have to operate it. So Galaxy might be a good solution for you to sort of take away the complexity of running that infrastructure. So I'd say that's the main thing. By volume, there are other competitors out there as well. And then we also partner and compete in certain cases. Snowflake is a data source that we can connect to. So a lot of our customers have Snowflake. But at the same time, as you heard earlier, we think about the world very differently from Snowflake. We think about the world being decentralized, whereas they think about it being centralized. It's a complex ecosystem, but hopefully that answered your question.
I was going to ask a follow-up question on security. So you talked a bit about security partnerships and such. In our book, actually, security is one of the undercurrents of the data engineering lifecycle, because we think it so often gets overlooked. And its own chapter, right? It's actually really, really key, not only to preventing breaches, but actually to getting access to data. That's the flip side that people overlook. And you may have alluded to this part already, but like, what's the multi-cloud security story from Starburst? What can you say about that in terms of what you can do now, what you can do in the future? Because I think there's a lot of talk about multi-cloud data access, maybe a little less about multi-cloud security, and there should be more, frankly.
Yeah. Well, so again, just to take a step back, we offer two different products. We have Starburst Galaxy and Starburst Enterprise. Now, Starburst Enterprise is what we built the early parts of the business on. It is our flagship product today. It is self-managed though, so you get to deploy it wherever you want, and that is advantageous for people who are particularly security conscious, who want to control every aspect, every part of their perimeter, because they can just take our software and deploy it however they want. And in some cases, that means totally disconnected from the internet, and that's fine. On the other hand, you have Galaxy, which is a SaaS offering. And in the case of Galaxy, we're managing the compute and the control plane, but not the storage. So you are providing, connectivity and access to your individual data sources for Galaxy to be able to access that. Having said that, security engineering is very much a part of how we build that product to ensure that it's, very secure. And probably somebody else on my team would have to go into more detail on exactly how we do that, but it's certainly something we're always conscious of.
That's awesome. Vignesh has a question here on LinkedIn. Yes. Are there any plans to allow customers to pay by the query using something like Starburst Galaxy? Obviously, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I'm sure the audience is dying to know.
Yeah, so I think if I understand, it's probably a question more around like a serverless type of model where you'd pay by the query, like Athena, for example, offers that type of model. It's certainly something we discuss actively, and I would say is in the roadmap, but not in the immediate term roadmap. So I wouldn't count on it in the immediate future, just because there is some extra complexity in sort of running that type of environment. AWS has some advantages structurally that the rest of us don't have. So it'll take us some time, but it's a great question.
That's cool. I guess, what are your thoughts, in general about consumption models for cloud data products right now? There seems to be a variety of these. I think, all used to great effect. Do you have any opinions on what works, what doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is definitely here to stay. And I think that, the beauty of it is you're only paying for what you use. And so, the connection to value is very obvious. In the old way of doing things, I think, people always over provisioned like for capacity. And as a result, there was inherent waste there. And now with consumption models, you're only paying for what you use. And I think particularly if we do have any, sort of bumps in the economic, outlook, being able to scale up and scale down your usage is actually going to be very strategically valuable for you. So we actually try to lead with that. Now, customers can commit to an annual deal with us to get some level of discount associated with it, but we actually encourage customers to start with the consumption pay-go model, because then they have max flexibility, and then they know that they're getting value out of every dollar that they spend. So I think there's a lot of advantages. You're going to see more and more companies, I think, moving in this direction.
That's interesting, because I think one trend we're seeing right now is that AWS is kind of the heavy hitter, big footprint cloud, push this consumption model.
Bigfoot.
This massive footprint, biggest footprint cloud, push this consumption-based model. And I think we're seeing a drift back in the other direction. I'm sure you know who we're talking about, like these big data players that are pushing, massive commit contracts and enterprise contracts. What do you think about this trend? Do you think we're going to drift back toward more of a pay-as-you-go model, or are we headed back toward the traditional enterprise, like big commit model instead?
Well, yeah, there is a tension there because people do want it both ways to some degree. They want to get the maximum discount that they possibly can, and that's where the commit lends itself. But at the same time, they don't want to overpay. And so even if you have a discounted commit, if you don't hit that commit, well, then you wasted that discount, right? So that's the challenge. It may be a mix for some time, but I do think like where there is variability in your business, that's where consumption, really offers the most value for you. Whether that's like, you're not sure if a new project is going to be huge or small, like, pay-go consumption makes sense. If you have steady state consumption that you feel very confident about, that's where, commits probably make more sense. And so, I think even within, the various products that you buy and pay for, you probably have different styles of contracts for different ones.
That's pretty cool. Switching gears to data mesh. So Starburst is, I think, very much aligned with data mesh, I think in branding and also in principle. I guess, how would you describe data mesh?
Well, I think at its core, it's this idea of data being decentralized, and that not only is that a practical reality, but also that it's actually can be turned into an advantage. And I think that's the way I like to summarize it for people. Like decentralized data was always viewed as a problem that needed to be solved. And so we took the data out of all these data sources and combined it, brought it all into one place. But I think in the process, created a bunch of other problems. And I think data mesh is kind of a back to first principles idea of, the domain expertise lives in the people who know the domain, who own the data. Why don't we leverage that expertise, enlist them in the process, have them create data as a product that they maintain, that they take prideful ownership of, that can be consumed by others in the organization. So, as Zhamak, who obviously created the concept, likes to say, it's a socio-technical phenomenon, which, believe me, I had to look up that word the first time. But the socio part, really speaks to the people and process that is, commensurate with the technical aspects of delivering, a single point of access and being able to enable, self-service consumption across all of your data. So, but that's at its core, is really, decentralization becomes the key pillar upon which we build our data strategy. And I think for large enterprises, it becomes almost a no-brainer. As soon as they learn about it, they're like, yeah, totally. I can get greater efficiency, greater self-service. I already have these data decentralized, so it lends itself to my world. But I think even for, more modern, born in the cloud types of companies, they can take advantage of these principles as well.
It's kind of a bigger paradigm shift too. I mean, I think one of the classic problems that arises in data warehousing is that application teams, so say you're building a phone app, you're going to focus on the data for your application, right? But you're not very worried about how it's used for analytics. And so you don't worry about the schema. You don't worry about schema changes. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but like, how do we, whether data is decentralized or not, how do we get application teams to like be more integrated with the data engineering processes and with analytics?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And for us, at least, the way we think about this is where like the data products concept comes into full view. Thinking about data as a product and creating a way to sort of provide self-service consumption and discovery first and foremost of the different data products that exist. Because when you do that, now you have a clear data product owner who sort of has responsibility and visibility, and it's visible what they've created in that data product. And I think that creates sort of natural tendencies to want to provide a high quality product. Your name is associated with it. Your coworkers know that this product that you maintain is either good or bad on the basis of the love and attention you put to it. And so it creates opportunities for collaboration. You might say, hey, Matt, love the data product, but could you add these extra fields to it? Could you organize it this way? And you create that dialogue, which I think, quite frankly, just doesn't often really exist, in today's world. Like there's just too much onus put on those central data engineering teams to somehow know the data, which they often just don't.
Scott Taylor here has a spicy question, as always. Hi, Scott.
Thanks for being provocative, Scott.
What do you think of Gartner classifying data mesh as obsolete in the recent hype cycle? They say it's dead on arrival.
Yeah. I actually just saw that late last week. So I think that I'll give you my honest answer. I think that when Gartner doesn't come up with the term, I bet you there's a trend. You could draw a correlation between terms they invent and terms they don't, and how excited they are about them. Zhamak Dehghani is the owner of this term. Like, full stop, full credit to her. And so there's some folks that grumble about it. The good news is there are some agreement, I think, around the problems that these concepts solve. And Gartner is more involved with the notion of the data fabric, which is different, but also solves some similar problems. To some degree, potato, and at the end of the day, we agree that data's decentralized, and we need to do something to solve that.
I got to tell you, when I read the definition of data fabric, and it took me like 10 rereads, and I was like, I still don't understand what they're trying to say here. So either I have like a bad reading comprehension problem, or it was written in such a way that I think the answer tried to appeal to everyone. But yeah, I don't know. I found myself just kind of struggling with that for a bit. But yeah, I saw this as well too. It was like somewhat along the hype cycle, then it's like obsolete. I don't know. I know that's one good way to get clicks. So.
I was going to say, I think it's the first time they've actually put it in the hype cycle. So that might be a new first of adding it and making it obsolete in literally the first publishing of it. So yeah.
They're attempting to kill it, like you said, because they didn't come up with it.
Right.
Let's see how this goes.
Yeah, we'll see what comes up. Data mash or
data garden, maybe.
Mosh pit. Yeah.
Data mosh pit. I like that. Yeah.
So that's kind of switching gears. When you run a company, you also scaled it to a unicorn. What was that like? I mean, again, we kind of talked earlier about bootstrapping a company, what that's like, raising money. But it's not often that we have, a leader of a unicorn company on the show. So walk us through the whole journey. What was that like?
Well, I think every phase of the startup is a different challenge. I actually asked a current CEO of an IPO company who is also a founder of a large data company in our space, and one I respect and admire. I won't mention him just because I didn't ask him if I could, but I asked him, does this job ever get easier? And he said, no, it's just different kinds of hard. And that's a thought that just keeps repeating in my mind, because I think every stage of the company's history is just a new challenge and new problems to solve. And I don't know that I could say one part is harder or easier than the other. Which for anyone who's earlier in the journey, sorry, I'm not sure that it gets easier. I always thought maybe it would. It's just different kinds of hard. So, I think the things that were challenging in the early days, you really want to establish product market fit, and you're very focused on that. But as you get bigger and bigger, it becomes, how do you scale intelligently? How do you scale the business in such a way that allows you to gain efficiencies rather than actually slow down? And that's in and of itself a very challenging problem. Another thing that I've consistently wrestled with is sort of, how do you maintain culture and values that in the early days were just organic? It was like you hired people who embodied those values. Like, I knew everybody very well on a personal level. And so you had very clear definition without ever having to explicitly say it in those very early days. And I think as you get larger, you have to be very conscious about talking about it. You have to make sure that it's a thing that we all live by, like the values that we hold true, in order for that to maintain itself. Otherwise, you end up with subcultures and different values in different parts of the organization. So those are just a few examples of things that I've had to sort of gain an appreciation for and change the way that we do things. Like, I'll give you another example. We repeat things all the time, which is something you have to do at scale and you don't do when you're small. Like I always felt like I was annoying if I said the same thing over and over again, but now it's a necessity because somebody in the audience might have just joined 3 weeks ago and they don't know that information. So we're gonna remind them again our goals for the year, our goals for next year, the path to IPO, the things that are important. Those are just a few examples, but it's an ongoing learning experience for sure.
It's really, walk me through goal setting. Matt and I always talk about this. We run a company together, and goal setting is one of these things where I feel like it seems easy, but I'm sure there's a lot more nuance to this. How do you set goals?
Well, first of all, I think you need long-term and short-term goals. I don't think one is sufficient. So, for us, earlier this year, we tried to kind of paint the picture to IPO. And to be clear, we think we're somewhere between 2 and 3 years away from IPO. I'm not, declaring a date here on this podcast by any means, but it's in that ballpark. What are all the things that we need to do to become a public company? What is the revenue mix going to look like? What are our financial metrics going to look like? How many people are we going to have? Are we going to be, how global are we going to be? And try to paint that future state picture. And by no means is IPO the end, but it's at least far enough out there that we've got like something that we're working towards. And so that's one aspect of it. And again, we'll repeat that from time to time to remind people where we're going. And then I think you need to create goals that are much more near term. Like what are the intermediate, building blocks that we have to achieve to set us up for that eventual goal down the road. And so that's much more like quarterly or even annual goals that we first try to set as an executive team. We'll do quarterly offsites where we get together as an executive team and sort of think about those key priorities in the short term. And then, ideally try to attach that to the individual goals of each of the teams so that the individual contributor can see how their impact, translates to the success of the company overall. And I'm not going to suggest we're always perfect at that part of it, but at least aspirationally, that's what we want to do.
Let me ask this question. So when you're a small company, when you're just like 10 people, you're constantly getting interrupted because you're small. And so you have customers coming to you, you have reliability problems with the product maybe. And then as you get to be a larger company, you get interrupted by other things like the economy maybe changes suddenly or COVID. How do you deal with interruptions as you work toward your goals? What's your approach?
It's a great question. And I think you have to be disciplined about going back to your priorities. And you have to be willing to say that's important, but not important enough, and just say, we're not going to do that. And that's hard. Because most of the interruptions are going to seem very important, and when you're small, it may literally be a customer that wants to take you in a direction that isn't the long-term direction, and so you're like wrestling with like, man, I really want this customer. It's a great logo, it's great revenue for us at this stage, but that is totally not who we are going to be. What do we do? And those are really, really challenging things to say no to, but I think saying no is sort of one of the most important skills of any entrepreneur, CEO, executive, particularly as you grow. You just have to say no to more and more things. And I think that's where the goals help, just to make those priorities public and clear so that everybody knows like, okay, this is our rubric. This is our framework for how we think about our priorities and ultimately what we're going to say no to.
That's really interesting. What are some of the leadership lessons that you've learned along the way?
Leadership lessons. So I think but many leaders have sort of different styles. That's certainly one thing I've observed. For me, the way that I like to run teams is very much that it's not my idea that we're going to ultimately choose here. We're going to choose the best idea. And so I think approaching things with sort of humility and creating a space that is safe to disagree, particularly disagree with a leader, disagree with the CEO even, is to me something that's very important. Not everyone leads that way. Some people are much more like hierarchical and just feel like they have the crystal clear vision and they just want everybody to execute along that. And that works for some people. For me, I think just given that we operate in a very dynamic space that's always changing, I genuinely always want extra data points. So it's sort of like, give me all of your data points so that we can make the best decision together. And that's a big part of my style. So you have to create, again, like intellectual safety for people to do that. If they're afraid that, you're going to crap on their idea, then they won't share those ideas. And I think ultimately we lose that way. So, that's one aspect. Another thing was just sort of like repeating things over and over again. I think that's actually really important to create clarity. And I think like as you scale, that's another consistent task that you have to be focused on, is how to create clarity within your organization so that everybody knows what we're doing and why and where we're going. Because those messages aren't one-to-one anymore. It's one-to-many. And I think that's something you have to focus on too. Those are just another thing I will say, and this is core to our values as a company, is this idea of grit. And I think like reminding people that this is supposed to be hard and that's okay. And that's part of the journey, I think is really important as well. Depending on where people have come from in the past, if they worked for a giant company like Google or what have you, life might have been more managed for them because of the size and scale. And, I think startup life in particular is much more, ups and downs and challenges and obstacles. And you have to kind of embrace that. You have to, be comfortable with that this is a marathon, not a sprint, or maybe this is an Ironman, triathlon.
It's CrossFit.
It was more like a Spartan race or something. Yeah.
Spartan race. There you go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess what advice do you have for founders just getting started? If you were to kind of look back at your younger self and give them advice, what would it be?
Well, first, I would say find mentors, find other people who've done it before. Those are the folks I've always learned the most from. I've had some great investors along the way too, but I think finding former operators, former entrepreneurs is hugely, hugely valuable. That's where a large portion of my education really has come from. So that would be one piece. Another one I would say, and this is for folks who maybe haven't quite started yet, but are thinking about it. And this piece of advice is sometimes controversial, but I very much believe it. I would say like, quit your job and do it, like force yourself to do it, because I think a lot of people try to kind of do multiple things at the same time. They've got their job, this their side hustle. And while I understand the attraction to that model, I just think this is the kind of thing that requires you to be all in, like 100% all in. And, you'll probably be able to find a job even if it doesn't work out. So sort of take solace in that and just go, burn the boats straight ahead, all in. That's my advice. I see too many people with kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and that means they're really not in it.
Yeah. How many engineers do we know that have a side project?
Yeah.
Right. Or a startup on the side, and how many of those actually go places? Have you seen? It's,
right.
Not that many. I mean, did you quit your job when you decided to start your Adapt?
I did. And even going back, well, so actually Adapt, it was in business school. I actually took a leave of absence. I dropped out of school, which at the time, by the way, was not popular with my mom. I had to promise her a degree later on, which I actually did after we sold it to Ternary Data, just to make mom happy. But no, I was 100% committed, and I felt like I had to do that. And I think where it actually helps you is that like that natural fear of having made a terrible decision is also a great motivator. Like, oh God, I can't let mom be right on this one. Like this thing has to work out. I've just given up, a great graduate school education. So that was just extra motivation every day.
Okay, so let me go back to, I've actually was going to ask you if you finished business school. So you came back and finished it later.
Yep.
Were there things that you got out of that process of coming back and finishing business school that have impacted your leadership now?
Yes, to some degree. So yes, the reason I went back was really just to fulfill this moral obligation to my mom. But
it's a nice kid.
But having said that, there are often times, even like today, where I think like, man, I wish I could go back to business school now. And just because I think there's so much more context after you've operated. Like it's all very theoretical when you're learning it for the first time without that experience. So yeah, like moonlighting as an MBA student post acquisition was actually a lot of fun. Trying to think of like some key lessons that I learned during that period. Yeah, nothing comes to mind immediately, but definitely, context helps. It is sort of funny that we go to business school before we have, all that experience, in a way.
It's interesting. I remember I was at a talk at the University of Utah Business School with Vinod Khosla, if you know who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he, Vinod being Vinod, the first thing he says to the entire class and the professors is like, none of y'all are going to do anything remarkable in life because you're
Because you're business.
because you're just not willing to take risks, right? And so then a few minutes later he calls out all the professors and said, "You guys are teaching nothing useful here. It's all entrepreneurship, and the only way you can really learn it is to go do it." And it's like I thought, okay, great way to make some friends here. But I thought he had a good point too, where I think to your point, it's kind of like you just kind of have to go and do this stuff, especially entrepreneurship. I think that there's definitely quite a bit to be gained from getting a business education, but I think there's no experience because a lot of the experience is really it's more about, I think, emotions and mentality and all the stuff that's more about you than it is about learning CapEx pricing models or something like that, right? It's just
I think that's a great way of putting it, and that is hard to teach, to your point, right? Without experiencing it. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Scott says, like Rodney Dangerfield in Back to School. The guy had the furniture store. That was actually a really good movie.
I'm gonna have to go watch it now and learn a few lessons.
Yeah, you learn all about it. Yeah, it's great. So, kind of closing out. I guess where do you see the world of data going on the next few years, say 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so I think like this idea of data being decentralized, whether we call it data mesh or something else, is here to stay. I think thinking about data as a product is a concept that really seems to resonate with folks. So I think we'll see more innovation around that. I also think that multi-cloud is very much here to stay. I saw a stat recently that was like 78% of large companies, anyways, are already multi-cloud today. I expect that will continue to grow. And one of the things we found, just anecdotally with our own customers, for those of you who are thinking, no, we'll never be multi-cloud, we're just AWS or we're just whatever. The truth is, the fastest way you become multi-cloud is you buy a company. And so if you're going to be successful enough that you're going to do M&A, you're going to become multi-cloud. That's the way I see it, as an inevitable reality. Multi-cloud also has other advantages. It allows you to really focus on using the tools that one cloud is best for. A lot of people like Google's ML suite, of tools, right? But maybe they built other aspects on AWS. So I do think multi-cloud is going to become a greater phenomenon in the years to come.
Yeah, it's funny. If I think about our client list, most of them were multi-cloud, and some it's because of M&A. In many cases, it's also just because of where the data lives, right? So what's one of the most common ad platforms? Google Ads. And so Google makes it really easy to get to their data on their platform. And so like if you have Google Ads, which almost everyone does, it makes sense to use Google Cloud for at least that piece.
That's a great point.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, it was good having you on the show. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. And thanks to the audience for the great questions and comments. Got some comments here. Great CEO insight. And Scott Taylor, who's usually hard to please, is very pleased with your definitions of data mesh. So that's awesome.
Great. Oh, yeah. Thank you both. And congrats on your recent book. That's no small feat, writing an O'Reilly book. So
here, we're gonna.
Yeah, I think you have an O'Reilly book too. Do you want to show that off to?
Yeah, well, my co-founders too. I can't take credit for this.
Yeah,
the original Presto book. There's now a Trino version of this as well.
Nice.
I was going to ask.
I watched them, blood, sweat, and tears. Writing that. So I know what you all went through.
Mm-hmm.
So congrats.
Yeah, I think about that right now, though. You said for the show, you said you were raising children at the same time. So I don't know which would be. I think that sounds. Difficulty scale way harder.
They're all hard. Yeah.
They're all hard. Yeah. It's awesome. So again, thanks to the audience. Thanks Justin for being on the show. Again, Friday we have Gleb from Datafold on, which is gonna be pretty cool. Guest coming up in August. I got Josh Starmer from SatsQuest is gonna be on, and a bunch of hitters. So it's gonna be cool. If you're in Utah as well, feel free to show up to the Utah Data Engineering Meetup on Wednesday. Down in Lehigh, go on meetup.com for more information. Matt and I will be raffling off 2 signed copies of our books, and we'll be buying you all food anyway. So show up. So cool. Justin, again, thanks, and thanks to Starburst crew, crew for doing everything awesome. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you
Cool.
both.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.